The crack of a gunshot split the dawn air as Tucker Morgan spurred his horse harder, racing toward the plume of smoke rising against the Montana sky. It was the summer of 1878, and the untamed frontier had taught him that trouble often came without warning. The smoke thickened as he approached the small homestead nestled against a copse of pine trees, and his heart sank when he saw the cabin's roof engulfed in flames. Tucker had been riding fence on his small cattle spread when he'd spotted the smoke. He didn't know who lived in the cabin, newcomers to the territory, he reckoned, but that hardly mattered now. As he neared, he could hear screams coming from inside. "Hello, anybody in there?" he shouted, leaping from his horse before it had fully stopped. The animal skittered away nervously as Tucker approached the burning structure. "Help us, please," a woman's voice, high with panic, called from inside. Tucker pulled his bandana up over his nose and mouth and approached the door, finding it hot to the touch but not yet ablaze. He kicked it open, coughing as smoke billowed out. "Where are you?" he called, crouching low. "Here, in the back room," came the reply. The main room of the cabin was already thick with smoke, flames crawling up one wall and across the ceiling. Tucker moved as quickly as he dared, navigating around a small table and chairs. The heat was oppressive, sweat instantly soaking through his shirt. He found them in the small bedroom, two women huddled together. One appeared to be unconscious, the other frantically trying to drag her toward the door. "I'm Tucker Morgan," he said quickly. "We need to get out now." "My sister," the conscious woman gasped, her face streaked with soot. "She breathed in too much smoke." Tucker nodded, lifting the unconscious woman into his arms. "Can you walk?" "Yes." She coughed violently, but determination shone in her eyes. "Lead the way." They made their way back through the burning cabin, Tucker shielding the unconscious woman with his body as best he could. Part of the roof collapsed behind them, sending sparks flying. The conscious sister stumbled once, and Tucker shifted to support her with his shoulder while still carrying her sister. They burst through the door just as another section of the roof gave way. Tucker didn't stop until they were a safe distance from the cabin. Only then did he gently set the unconscious woman on the ground. "Julia," the conscious sister said, dropping to her knees beside her. "Julia, can you hear me?" Tucker quickly assessed the situation. The unconscious woman Julia was breathing, though shallowly. Her face was smudged with soot, her simple cotton dress singed in places. "What's your name, madam?" Tucker asked the conscious sister. Jane Donovan," she replied, not taking her eyes off her sister. "And this is Julia." "Miss Donovan, I need to get some water. My horse has wandered off a bit. Will you be all right for a moment?" Jane nodded, finally looking up at him. Despite the dire circumstances, Tucker was struck by her clear, determined gaze. Her brown hair had come loose from its pins, and her face was smudged with soot, but there was a quiet strength in her expression that caught him off guard. "Thank you," she said. "We would have died without your help." Tucker retrieved his horse and the canteen attached to his saddle. When he returned, Jane had propped Julia's head on her lap and was gently patting her cheek, trying to rouse her. "Here," Tucker said, offering the canteen. "Small sips for both of you." Jane took the canteen gratefully, first helping her sister drink before taking a sip herself. Julia stirred, coughing weakly. "What happened?" Tucker asked, keeping a wary eye on the cabin, which was now fully engulfed in flames. There was no saving it. "The stove," Jane explained, her voice hoarse. "There must have been a problem with the chimney. We woke to smoke filling the cabin." Julia went to check and the roof was already burning. "We tried to get out, but something fell and struck her." She gestured to a nasty bump forming on her sister's forehead. Julia's eyes fluttered open. "Jane," she whispered. "I'm here," Jane soothed. "We're safe now." Tucker stood, surveying the burning cabin and the sparse surrounding land. "You ladies can't stay here. My place is about 5 miles east. It's not much, but you're welcome to it while you recover." Jane looked up at him, wariness crossing her features. Tucker understood her hesitation. Two women alone with a strange man was hardly proper, even in these circumstances. "I have a small bunkhouse separate from the main cabin," he added quickly. I'll stay there. You and your sister can have the main house. Jane studied him for a moment, then nodded. Thank you, Mr. Morgan. We don't have many options. Tucker, please, he said. Can your sister ride? I think so, Julia said weakly, struggling to sit up. With some effort, Tucker helped both women onto his horse. He walked alongside, leading the animal slowly back toward his homestead. The sun climbed higher in the sky as they traveled, and Tucker found himself stealing glances at Julia Donovan. There was something compelling about her, a quiet dignity despite their circumstances. You two new to the territory? He asked as they walked. Jane nodded. We arrived last month from St. Louis. Our parents died last winter and we decided to start fresh out west. A shadow crossed her face. So much for that. Where's your nearest family? Back in Missouri, Julia said softly. We're alone out here. Tucker's small homestead came into view as they crested a gentle hill. It wasn't much, a modest log cabin with a covered porch, a small barn, and the bunkhouse he'd mentioned. A corral held his small herd of horses, and a few head of cattle grazed in the distance. It's not fancy, Tucker said, suddenly self-conscious of his humble home. It's standing, Jane replied simply. That makes it better than ours. Once they arrived, Tucker helped the sisters into the main cabin. It was a simple space, one main room with a stove, table, and chair, plus a small bedroom partitioned off with a curtain. Everything was neat and orderly, if sparse. You can take the bed, Tucker said. I'll bring in some extra blankets so one of you can sleep by the stove. Jane helped Julia to the bedroom while Tucker fetched water and set it to heat on the stove. He gathered some clean shirts and a spare pair of trousers. These might be big, but they're clean, he said, placing them on the table. I'll step out while you get changed. There's soap by the wash basin. While the women cleaned up, Tucker busied himself with his chores, giving them privacy. His mind kept returning to the sisters, particularly Jane. There was something about her quiet strength that intrigued him. In the 4 years since he'd come west after the war, Tucker had kept mostly to himself, focusing on building his small ranch. He'd had little time for socializing, let alone courting. When he returned to the cabin later with some fresh killed rabbit for supper, he found Jane sitting at the table, her hair damp from washing, wearing one of his shirts with the sleeves rolled up. Julia's sleeping, she said softly. The doctor in town said she has a weak chest, the smoke. She trailed off, worry creasing her brow. We can fetch the doctor tomorrow, Tucker offered. Jane shook her head. Town's too far, we'll have to wait and see. She looked up at him. You've been very kind, Mr. Morgan. Tucker, he reminded her, placing the rabbit on the table, and it's nothing any decent person wouldn't do. Still, we're grateful. She watched as he began preparing the rabbit. May I help? Tucker nodded, and they worked in companionable silence, preparing a simple stew. As they worked, Tucker found himself studying Jane's profile when she wasn't looking. She had a graceful way about her, even in borrowed clothes, her hair falling in damp waves down her back. How long have you been out here? Jane asked as they waited for the stew to cook. 4 years, Tucker replied. Came west after serving in the war, wanted open spaces and quiet. You fought for the Union, Tucker nodded. Illinois Regiment, you. St. Louis stayed with the Union, though there were plenty who sympathized with the Confederacy, Jane said. Our father was a lawyer. He believed in the Union cause. They spoke quietly over supper, sharing bits of their lives. Tucker learned that Jane had been a teacher in St. Louis while Julia had worked as a seamstress. They'd pooled their savings to purchase the small homestead that now lay in ashes. What will you do now? Tucker asked. Jane sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly, the first sign of vulnerability he'd seen from her. I don't know. We spent everything we had on that land and cabin. You're welcome to stay here while you figure things out, Tucker heard himself say. I mean it. Jane studied him as if trying to determine his motives. That's very generous, but no strings attached, Tucker added quickly. I have plenty of work to keep me busy in the barn and bunkhouse. You'll hardly see me. After a moment, Jane nodded. Just until Julia is better and we can make other arrangements. The next morning, Tucker woke early as usual. He'd spent an uncomfortable night in the small bunkhouse, but it was worth it to provide the Donovan sisters with safe shelter. As he emerged to start his morning chores, he was surprised to find Jane already outside, gathering eggs from the small henhouse. "You didn't need to do that," he said. Jane straightened, a small basket of eggs in her hands. "I won't be a charity case, Mr. Morgan. If we're staying, we'll earn our keep." Tucker couldn't help but smile. "Fair enough. How's your sister?" "Better, I think. She's still sleeping." Jane looked toward the east, where the sun was just beginning to crest the horizon. "It's beautiful here." "That it is," Tucker agreed, though he found himself looking at Jane rather than the sunrise. The days fell into a pattern. Julia recovered slowly but steadily, and both sisters insisted on contributing to the running of the homestead. Jane proved to be an excellent cook, and once Julia was well enough, she began mending Tucker's clothes and making the cabin more homely with small touches. Tucker found himself enjoying their company more than he'd expected. He'd grown accustomed to solitude, but there was something warming about returning from a day's work to find the cabin lit and welcoming, the smell of cooking filling the air and Jane's smile greeting him. It was Jane who fascinated him the most. She was practical and strong-willed, yet there was a gentleness to her that emerged when she thought no one was watching. He caught her once, standing on the porch at dusk, her face lifted to the fading light, a look of peaceful contemplation on her features. 2 weeks after the fire, Tucker rode into town for supplies. While there, he made inquiries about the Donovan sisters' land. "Shame about that fire," the general store owner said as he tallied Tucker's purchases. "Those girls paid good money for that place." "Old man Jenkins wasn't entirely honest with them, I reckon. That chimney was faulty from the start." Tucker frowned. "You mean he knowingly sold them a dangerous property?" The store owner shrugged. "Jenkins left for California right after the sale. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say?" Tucker added paper and pencils to his purchases. "The sisters mentioned Miss Jane used to be a teacher. You know if the school here needs one?" "Matter of fact, they do. Miss Winters is getting married and moving to Denver next month." Tucker nodded thoughtfully. He gathered his supplies and headed back to the homestead, his mind working on a plan. When he returned, he found Jane sitting on the porch mending one of his shirts. She looked up as he approached, a smile spreading across her face that made his heart skip a beat. "Successful trip?" she asked. Tucker nodded, handing her a small package. "Got you something?" Jane unwrapped it, her eyes widening at the paper and pencils inside. "How did you know?" "You mentioned you were a teacher," Tucker said, suddenly feeling shy. "Thought you might like to write letters or—" "Well, I heard the town school needs a teacher starting next month." Jane looked up sharply. "Really?" Tucker nodded. "Miss Winters is leaving. If you're interested, we could ride into town next week and you could inquire." "That would be, thank you." Jane clutched the paper to her chest. "That's very thoughtful." That evening, after supper, Tucker sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. The door opened and Jane joined him, sitting on the step beside him. "Julia's asleep," she said. "She's much better now, good to hear." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the night sounds of the prairie surrounding them. "We should be making plans to move on," Jane said finally. "We've imposed on your hospitality long enough." Tucker felt a pang at her words. "You're not imposing. I've enjoyed having you both here." Jane turned to look at him, her expression softening in the moonlight. "We've enjoyed being here too, more than I expected." Their eyes held for a long moment, and Tucker felt something shift between them. He cleared his throat, suddenly nervous, about the teaching position. "If you got it, would you and Julia stay in the area?" Jane nodded slowly. "We might. There's nothing waiting for us elsewhere." Tucker took a deep breath. "I was thinking. My place is closer to town than your land was, and it's a lot to manage alone." He met her gaze. "I'm not saying this right. What I mean is, I'd like it if you both considered staying. Here, permanently." Jane's eyes widened. "Tucker, I know it's sudden," he rushed on, "and I know you barely know me, but I've come to care for you both, especially you, Jane." His voice softened. "I admire your courage. The way you've handled everything that's happened, your determination, your kindness." Jane was silent for so long that Tucker began to regret speaking, but then she reached out and placed her hand over his. "When we came west, I thought we were being brave," she said quietly. "But really, we were just running away from grief, the fire. That was the first real test of our courage, and you were there." She squeezed his hand. "I've come to care for you too, Tucker Morgan." The following weeks brought changes to the homestead. Jane secured the teaching position in town, and Tucker built an addition to the cabin so Julia could have her own room. The sisters officially moved in, though Julia teasingly complained about being a third wheel as the romance between Tucker and Jane blossomed. Tucker found himself looking forward to each day in a way he never had before. Jane's presence brightened his world. They shared books in the evenings, Jane reading aloud while Tucker and Julia listened. They talked about their hopes and dreams, and slowly, Tucker began to imagine a future that included a family of his own. One evening in late autumn, Tucker and Jane walked along the creek that bordered his property. The leaves had turned golden and red, and the air held the crispness of coming winter. "I received a letter from the land office today," Tucker said, taking Jane's hand. "They've investigated Jenkins and found he's defrauded several people. They're offering restitution to those affected, including you and Julia." Jane stopped walking, turning to face him. "That's wonderful news. Julia will be so pleased." "There's more," Tucker continued. "I've been thinking about expanding the ranch. With the money from the restitution, we could buy the adjacent property, build a bigger house." "We?" Jane asked, her eyes searching his. Tucker took both her hands in his. "Jane Donovan, these past months have been the happiest of my life. When I rode toward that burning cabin, I had no idea I was riding toward my future. Your courage that day saved your sister, but your courage every day since then has saved me from a lonely life." He dropped to one knee. "Will you marry me?" Jane's eyes filled with tears, but her smile was radiant. "Yes, Tucker Morgan, yes, I will." Their wedding took place the following spring, with Julia standing as maid of honor and half the town in attendance. Jane continued teaching, and Tucker's ranch prospered. Julia eventually married the town's new doctor, building a house nearby so the sisters remained close. Years later, Tucker and Jane would tell their children the story of how they met of fire and smoke and courage. And Tucker would always end the tale the same way. "Your mother is the bravest woman I've ever known. She faced the flames without flinching, and in doing so, she set my heart ablaze with a fire that will never go out." Jane would always blush at this, but their children never tired of hearing how a cowboy saved two sisters from a burning cabin, only to find himself rescued by their courage and love. On the 10th anniversary of the fire, Tucker surprised Jane with a special gift, a small wooden box he'd carved himself. Inside was a silver locket containing a tiny piece of charred wood. "From the cabin?" Jane asked, touching it gently. Tucker nodded. "I went back a few days after the fire, before the rain washed everything away. I wanted something to remember the day that brought you into my life." Jane closed her hand around the locket. "Some might find it strange to commemorate a disaster." "It wasn't a disaster," Tucker said, wrapping his arms around her. "It was the beginning of everything good in my life." That night, as they sat on their porch watching their 3 children play in the yard of the larger home they'd built together, Jane leaned her head against Tucker's shoulder. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't seen the smoke that day?" she asked. Tucker kissed the top of her head. "I don't believe in coincidences, Jane. I was meant to find you." "My hero," she said with a smile. Tucker shook his head. "No, you're mine. You taught me that courage isn't just about facing danger, it's about facing each day with hope and determination. And that's something you've never lacked." As the sun set over their land, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Tucker marveled at how one moment of crisis had led to a lifetime of joy. The fire that had threatened to destroy Jane and Julia's lives had instead forged a bond that would never be broken, a love story born in flames, tempered by courage, and destined to burn bright for all their days.